Just let the girl go. Give her to us.
You might as well go crazy, right? Might as well go all out.
You have to invite them in.
Then you all die here!
Dead by dawn! Dead by dawn! Dead by dawn! No, this isn't a Evil Dead spin-off or remake. This is the movie Dead by Dawn, directed and co-written by Sean Cain. Although, if you know what I'm talking about, Dead by Dawn is a famous line, of course, from the Evil Dead franchise. Anyway, nothing to do with that film. Let's just make that clear. So this is a kind of home invasion movie that I think is subtly clever, or it could have just lucked into having some interesting commentary about stuff. But I think it's actually by design. So what we've got here, we have a guy who is suffered a great loss in his life and is going to a remote cabin to kill himself because he has experienced something very tragic within his life. Now, he's disturbed in this kind of cabin by this young woman who seems to be on the run from some type of group of hunters. Now, this woman has been the victim of some abuse within her life herself and has been hunted by a trio of sadistic killers, one of which played by modern scream queen Jamie Bernadette. And they are intent on doing some very bad things to this woman. And now it's up to this suicidal man to try and step up and defend this woman and maybe even find some purpose in his life now. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie to find out. But let me just say that this is kind of like a horror version of Home Alone in certain aspect. So that'll give you an idea of maybe where the story might end up going. So let's discuss. Like I said, this movie actually tackles a little bit of social commentary without really hitting you over the head with it. And I was thinking, do you know what? This is either subtly quite clever, or they've just kind of like walked into having some social commentary without really thinking about it. So what do I mean? So for a start, our central protagonist, this guy who's going to commit suicide, trying to commit suicide, is a black guy, and it's kind of like messing with people's expectations about certainly, race and stuff like that. Our killers are all white. Our protagonist is a black man defending a white woman. And, obviously in the States, there's a lot of kind of preconceived ideas about, racial profiling and stuff like this. So this movie is, I feel, attempting to try and turn it on its head. But I feel it doesn't really try and make a big hoo-ha about it. There's one line in it. But I feel it does a good job of showing you that you shouldn't judge necessarily people by necessarily your first impression. And that's also, they also double down in this when we learn that there's certain relations to this woman who should be there to protect her, but actually are maybe, the worst person. So your initial, reaction to people who might already be close to someone aren't always the best. So this movie, I think, does a good job of maybe defying some expectations and stuff like that of who you should immediately jump to the conclusion of who's a good guy versus who's a bad guy, etc. I actually thought that was quite good. And again, it kind of just to kind of tie in with that, it also talks about family ties and things like that, and what makes a family. The movie goes in some quite dark places. Again, I don't want to spoil anything here, and I'm not talking about graphical images, but I'm talking about some of the subject matter here for a kind of a lower budget, straight to kind of VOD, DVD style movie. I think, phew, that's pretty cutting. I mean, that's pretty dark stuff that the movie is kind of with talking about. And the weird thing about this movie is it almost has a somewhat of a playful tone, but some of the situations that this movie is kind of discussing and kind of has in it are actually pretty dark. I mean, I don't want to spoil it for you because there's reveals happen within the movie. There's a couple of them actually. You think, oof, that is harsh. That is some harsh stuff going on there. But yeah, I found it quite good because it gave the movie some real gravitas in these kind of situations, and I feel it goes in a so dark that it defies your expectations again. I actually thought the performances from our two protagonists was really good, and I actually quite enjoyed their characters. Our female she's painted to be a very kind of like liberal, left-leaning kind of bit of snowflake, so to speak. But you know, she has to we see her have to sort of dig deep and sort of defend herself and become a little bit more aggressive and things like that as the movie kind of goes on. And our male protagonist, this guy who wants to commit suicide again, you know, he has now the feeling of responsibility. Because you know, he now has to try and help this helpless woman who, you know, is quite happy to end his life, and it just so happens now he's given purpose. So I thought was pretty good here. The movie also does some quite fun things, as I've mentioned, in regards to kind of the Home Alone, but it's not the main part of the film. This is only one real sequence here, so I feel that there's, you know, it's not too much of it. It's just kind of like maybe 10 minutes of the film is this kind of like Home Alone style situation where they have various kind of traps and things like that. The movie is well paced, and I feel the setup is pretty good, and our characters are all pretty interesting and kind of well defined. And as I've mentioned, there's certain reveals that kind of happen throughout the movie, so I'm cautious about what I'm trying to say because I do not want to spoil some of these kind of reveals, even though I don't think you can pretty much piece together what's kind of going on. Nonetheless, I felt that they're quite kind of potent to the actual story. So what doesn't work? Our antagonists, to me, were portrayed to be a little bit too cartoony. Especially one of them that has maybe the closest relationship to one of our victims. To me, just some of the kind of the acting here was a little bit OTT, and it almost comes across as a bit too much like a comedy at times when you couple that with some of the very serious subject matter that is discussed with this movie. Then you have these like weirdly sort of comic performances. Really do not mesh, and it's not just limited to this one. Even Jamie Bernadette, who's you know, has done some good stuff in the past, to me was just a little bit too much and I got the feeling it is more the direction than maybe the acting, but she was like a little bit too turned up to 11. There's one scene where she's just like stabbing air for no real reason and like sort of screaming and snarling and stuff like that. It's just like, it's just a little bit silly, to be honest, considering again, and I'll say considering we have this very sobering reveals that happen through the movie. It's just like, and then we have this kind of cheesy sort of like OTT performance. Didn't mesh to me. I have to say as well, some of the narrative flow didn't really work for me. So I'm going to tell you one sequence to demonstrate, and that's all I'll kind of really say. So we have our first confrontation. We have the guy and the woman in this cabin. Then we have our three attackers outside, and there's an exchange of gunfire between the two parties. Now, what you would expect to do then is the two parties in the house to be kind of running around for cover, you know, trying to kind of like stay out the way of the windows. But what do? No, they sit down and have some breakfast and have a good old laugh. I'm thinking, what? This doesn't make sense. It just kind of like breaks the realism. And there's a couple of instances again where you'll just see people like standing by windows and stuff like that when we know that there is armed people outside and things like this, or standing in the doorway and stuff like that. So it doesn't have that. It has that Hollywood logic where people just don't act like realistic people, which is a shame because I feel some of the kind of the subject matter is so sobering it would have really benefited it, but it ends up being more of a kind of a B movie because of that. But overall, I have to say I did enjoy this movie. I enjoyed the characters and I enjoyed the arcs of both our protagonists and to a degree our antagonists. So I don't feel the antagonists were portrayed as well as I would have liked. Yeah, and it's like I've said, it's a without being too graphic, it does actually end up being a very kind of harrowing story to a certain degree. So I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.